September 4th, 1957. Little Rock, Arkansas. 9 black teenagers prepared to enter Central High School. It would be the first time in the school's history that black students attended. 3 years earlier, the Supreme Court had ruled in Brown v. Board of Education that school segregation was unconstitutional. But across the South, states refused to comply. Arkansas Governor Orval Faubus had called out the National Guard, not to protect the black students, but to prevent them from entering. The 9 students arrived that morning to find a mob of angry white people screaming threats. The National Guard blocked the school entrance. One student, 15-year-old Elizabeth Eckford, faced the mob alone. The photograph of her walking through hatred with quiet dignity would become an iconic image of the civil rights movement. This is the story of the Little Rock Nine, of 9 children who became warriors in the battle for civil rights, who walked through hate to claim their right to an education, who changed America forever. The students. They were ordinary teenagers. Minnie Brown, 15. Elizabeth Eckford, 15. Ernest Green, 16. Thelma Mothershed, 16. Melba Patillo, 15. Gloria Ray, 15. Terrence Roberts, 15. Jefferson Thomas, 15. Carlotta Walls, 14. The youngest of the 9. They had been carefully selected. They were excellent students. They came from stable families. They had strong character. Daisy Bates, the president of the Arkansas NAACP, had chosen them knowing they would face unimaginable hostility. They needed to be strong enough to withstand what was coming. The students understood what they were attempting. They knew there would be resistance, but they believed in the law. The Supreme Court had ruled segregation unconstitutional. They had a right to attend Central High. They were prepared to claim that right. What they weren't prepared for was the depth of hatred they would face. The violence, the daily torture, the psychological warfare that would last an entire school year. They were children, and they were about to become soldiers. Governor Faubus blocks integration. Governor Orval Faubus opposed integration. On September 2nd, the day before school was to begin, he ordered the Arkansas National Guard to surround Central High School. He claimed he was preventing violence. In reality, he was preventing integration. On September 3rd, the National Guard turned away the 9 students. The students and their families decided to try again the next day. Daisy Bates coordinated the plan. 8 of the students would arrive together. They would be met by ministers who would escort them to the school. But Elizabeth Eckford's family didn't have a telephone. She never received the message about meeting the group. On the morning of September 4th, she went to Central High alone. September 4, 1957. Elizabeth faces the mob. Elizabeth Eckford was 15 years old. She wore a white dress she had made herself. She carried her books. She walked toward Central High School expecting to attend her first day of class. Instead, she walked into a mob. Hundreds of white people had gathered at the school. They were screaming, shouting racial slurs, threatening violence. The National Guard formed a line blocking the entrance. Elizabeth saw the soldiers and felt relieved. They would protect her. They would let her through. She was wrong. Elizabeth approached the guard. A soldier raised his rifle and blocked her path. She tried another entrance. Again, the soldiers blocked her. The mob pressed closer. People screamed in her face. "Lynch her! Lynch her!" A woman spat at her. Men shouted threats. Elizabeth remained calm. She walked along the line of soldiers, looking for an opening. There was none. The mob followed her, growing louder, more violent in their threats. News photographers captured every moment. Will Counts, a photographer for the Arkansas Democrat, took a photograph that would define the crisis. Elizabeth walking alone in her white dress, books clutched to her chest, face composed despite the hatred surrounding her. Behind her, a white girl named Hazel Bryan screamed racial slurs, her face twisted in rage. Elizabeth made it to a bus bench and sat down. She was trapped. The mob surrounded her. A white man sat beside her and told her to leave. Go home. You'll get hurt. A white woman named Grace Lorch, who supported integration, broke through the crowd and sat with Elizabeth. She helped her onto a bus. Elizabeth rode home, traumatized, but physically unharmed. The photograph of her walk through hatred appeared in newspapers around the world. The image showed America's ugly truth, a composed black teenager facing a mob of hateful white people. It was impossible to look at that photograph and believe segregation was anything but evil. September 23, the mob takes control. For 3 weeks, the 9 students stayed home while legal battles continued. Federal court ordered Faubus to remove the National Guard. He complied, but he did nothing to protect the students or maintain order. On September 23rd, the Little Rock Nine entered Central High through a side entrance while a mob gathered at the front. The students made it inside, but the mob grew violent. They attacked black journalists. They beat anyone suspected of supporting integration. Police struggled to control the crowd. By midday, the situation was too dangerous. The students were secretly evacuated from the school. The mob had won. Central High School was closed. Integration had failed. Arkansas had defied the Supreme Court and federal law. The question was, what would happen next? President Eisenhower acts. President Dwight Eisenhower had been reluctant to enforce integration. He believed in states' rights. He didn't want federal troops involved in local matters. But Governor Faubus had defied a federal court order. The mob had prevented the enforcement of constitutional rights. The president had no choice. On September 24th, Eisenhower federalized the Arkansas National Guard, taking control away from Faubus. He ordered the 101st Airborne Division to Little Rock. 1,000 paratroopers from one of the Army's most elite units were sent to enforce the integration of a high school. That evening, Eisenhower addressed the nation on television. He explained that he had to act. Federal law had been defied. Order had to be restored. The students would attend Central High. The Army would ensure it. September 25. Entering under military escort. On the morning of September 25th, 1957, the Little Rock Nine entered Central High School, escorted by soldiers from the 101st Airborne Division. Jeeps surrounded the students. Paratroopers with fixed bayonets formed a protective corridor. The mob was kept at a distance. For the first time, the 9 students entered the school and stayed. Inside Central High, each of the 9 students was assigned a personal soldier escort. Wherever they went, a paratrooper followed 10 feet behind. The soldiers' presence prevented the worst violence. But they couldn't stop everything. They couldn't stop the daily harassment, the verbal abuse, the psychological torture that the 9 students would endure for the next 8 months. The daily ordeal. Every day was a battle. White students tripped the 9 in hallways. They threw food at them in the cafeteria. They pushed them downstairs. They poured ink on their clothes. They vandalized their lockers. They called them names constantly. The N-word echoed through the halls hundreds of times a day. Teachers mostly ignored it. Some teachers were openly hostile. They gave the 9 students failing grades, regardless of their work. They allowed white students to harass them during class. Only a few teachers showed any kindness or fairness. Melba Patillo kept a diary. She documented the daily abuse: being pushed downstairs, having acid thrown in her eyes in the bathroom, being surrounded by boys who threatened rape, the terror of walking through the halls, never knowing what violence might come next. The 9 students couldn't fight back. Any retaliation would be used as an excuse to expel them. They had to endure. They had to be perfect. They had to absorb hatred every day and respond with dignity. They were 15, 16, 14 years old, and they had to be stronger than adults. Minijian Brown fights back. Minijian Brown endured months of abuse. In December, in the cafeteria, white students blocked her path and taunted her. She had a tray of chili. In a moment of frustration, she dumped it on the heads of 2 white boys. White students cheered, not because they supported Minijin, but because they knew what would happen. Minijin was suspended for 6 days. The white students who had been harassing her for months faced no consequences. In February, after more abuse, Minijin called a white girl white trash in response to being called the N-word. That was enough. Minijin was expelled. The white girl faced no punishment. Cards appeared throughout Central High. 1 down, 8 to go. The remaining 8 endured until the end of the school year. They refused to quit. They refused to give the mob what it wanted. May 1958, Ernest Green graduates. On May 27, 1958, Ernest Green became the first black student to graduate from Central High School. He walked across the stage to receive his diploma. The white audience was silent. No applause, no recognition, just cold silence. But Martin Luther King Jr. was in the audience. He had come to witness this historic moment. Ernest Green had done it. He had integrated Central High. He had survived. And his diploma proved that segregation could be defeated. The 8 other students would return to Central High in the fall. But that summer, Governor Faubus closed all Little Rock public high schools rather than continue integration. The schools remained closed for the entire 1958 to 1959 school year. White students attended private schools or went to schools in other districts. Black students had nowhere to go. Their education was sacrificed to maintain segregation. In 1959, the schools reopened. Integration continued. Slowly, painfully, but it continued. The Little Rock Nine had broken the barrier. They had proven it could be done. Other districts would follow. The end of segregation had begun. The cost. The 9 students paid a terrible price for their courage. The year at Central High traumatized them all. They suffered PTSD, depression, anxiety that lasted for years. Some struggled with relationships and trust. The abuse they endured left deep psychological scars. Their families suffered too. Daisy Bates's home was firebombed. The 9 families received death threats. Some lost their jobs. They were ostracized by parts of the black community who feared white retaliation. The students were called troublemakers. People wished they had just stayed quiet. But they hadn't stayed quiet. They had stood up. They had demanded their rights. And they had changed the world. Reconciliation, 1997. 40 years after that terrible September morning, Elizabeth Eckford returned to Little Rock. A photographer wanted to recreate the famous photograph. Elizabeth agreed reluctantly. Hazel Bryan, the white girl who had screamed at Elizabeth in the original photograph, reached out. She wanted to apologize. She had carried guilt for 40 years. That photograph had defined her as a symbol of hate. She wanted Elizabeth to know she had changed. She was sorry. The two women met. They talked. Elizabeth accepted Hazel's apology. They posed together for a photograph. This time they stood side by side. The image of reconciliation. But reconciliation was complicated. As time passed, Hazel wanted Elizabeth to appear with her publicly, to show that forgiveness was complete. Elizabeth felt pressured. The trauma from 1957 was still with her. Being asked to perform forgiveness for white people's comfort was its own burden. Eventually, their relationship became strained. Elizabeth needed space to heal. Hazel needed forgiveness to be visible. They went their separate ways. Some wounds are too deep to fully heal. Some forgiveness is private, not public. That's the complicated truth of reconciliation. The 9 today. The Little Rock. 9 lived their lives with the weight of history. Ernest Green became an investment banker. Elizabeth Eckford struggled with PTSD for decades. Melba Patillo became a journalist and author. The others pursued various careers. They remained connected by their shared experience. In 1999, President Bill Clinton awarded them the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest civilian honor. In 2009, they attended President Obama's inauguration. The children who had integrated a high school lived to see a black president. The change they helped create had come full circle. Central High School is now a National Historic Site. A museum tells the story of the Little Rock 9. Students today, black, white, Latino, Asian, walk the same halls. They learn about the 9 teenagers who made their integrated education possible. Some appreciate it, some take it for granted. That's the privilege the 9 fought to give them. The lesson. The Little Rock crisis showed America's soul. It revealed the violent resistance to equality, the determination to maintain white supremacy at any cost, the willingness to close schools rather than educate black children alongside white children. But it also showed courage. 9 teenagers facing a mob, walking through hate every day for an entire school year, enduring abuse, violence, and psychological torture, never giving up, never surrendering their right to an education. They were children. They should have been worried about homework and dances and sports. Instead, they were warriors. They fought a battle that shouldn't have been necessary. They claimed rights that should have been automatic. They proved they were equal in a society determined to believe otherwise. Closing. September 4th, 1957. A 15-year-old girl in a white dress walked toward a school. She wanted an education. She believed in the law. She thought the National Guard would protect her. Instead, she walked through a mob alone. Hatred surrounded her. Threats echoed in her ears. A photographer captured her dignity in the face of rage. That photograph changed history. Elizabeth Eckford and the Little Rock 9 didn't end segregation by themselves, but they struck a crucial blow. They showed the world what segregation really meant. They proved that black students could succeed in white schools. They demonstrated courage that inspired a movement. This is their story. 9 children who became warriors, who walked through hate to claim their rights, who survived a year of hell and graduated with their dignity intact, who changed America forever. Their courage made possible the world we live in today. Integrated schools, equal access to education, the opportunity for every child, regardless of race, to learn and grow and succeed. It wasn't given freely. It was won by 9 teenagers who refused to back down. We owe them more than we can ever repay. We honor them by continuing their work, by fighting injustice wherever we find it, by standing up when it would be easier to stay silent, by remembering that change requires courage. And sometimes that courage comes from children who shouldn't have to be so brave. The Little Rock Nine walked through hate so that future generations wouldn't have to. That's what heroes do. They endure suffering so others can live free. They sacrifice so others can thrive. They face the mob so others can walk in peace. Thank you, Little Rock Nine. America is better because you were brave.